Hey everybody, it's Monster back again with Eustass Gaming, and I am here today to bring you my first place Kaido list. I'm really excited to bring this deck because I love purple Kaido. I've actually been playing this almost as much as I've been playing green in the OP01 format. But before I do like any type of deep dive into the lead or anything like that, if you're not subscribed already, if you drop a sub down below, I'd really appreciate it. We're on the road to our first 1K subs, and we're almost at that 250 sub milestone. So if you're not subscribed already, you've been seeing my content, and you like what we're doing over here at Eustass Gaming, if you drop a sub down below, we'd appreciate it. Drop a like, help us get in the algorithm, and any questions you guys have, any comments or anything like that, drop it down below. I'd love to see what you guys have to say about this deck and what you think. But let's talk about Kaido. This card has been on a tear in the OP01 format. It's really powerful because once this deck gets going, and once the train is out the station, the train is going. And it's really hard to stop. So I think that that is one thing that players have kind of really realized, and it's really just a powerful deck that, especially when you pilot it well, it's amazing. Let's get into the first card that really makes it so amazing and talk about Onigashima Island. Onigashima, we're at 4 of. I would never play this card at a 3 of. I don't think I've even seen it played at 3 of because everybody just knows it's a fantastic card. This is the card that I mulligan for. If I don't see it in my first hand, I 100% of the time will mulligan for it. It definitely is possible to play the deck without this card. I just prefer to play it with this card. I do things like take life until I find it to see if it's in my life until I have to defend myself and things like that. And we kind of have an engine in here that helps us do that. We just kind of do the most to try to find this card because that's what this deck is centralized around, finding this card. I know some Kaido decks and things like that play other ways to kind of keep the ramp up and everything like that. But something that you'll see in this deck is that we are focused on finishing our opponent out cleanly, and the cleanest way to finish the game out is definitely going to be with Onigashima throughout the game. Let's get into our first package, which is going to be our blocker package. We have 4 Kurozumi. This is the 2-drop 3K blocker. The reason this card is so fantastic is that because it still has a counter, but it has 3,000 power, so it can actually block things like Shanks. Actually, it's just Shanks that matters in that 2,000 to 3,000 range, but that's all that matters. It's the fact that it has an extra utility. It gives you a little bit better of a matchup into the red, and it just makes it so they have 1 less out to your small blockers. It is a 2-cost blocker, and which just fits into a lot of your combos. When you're on 7 Dawn, let's say, you can tap 5, play a Queen, Dawn -1, get your draws, and then tap 2 to play this so that you don't have to sack the Queen in a really contentious matchup. That's just one of the few ways that you can utilize this card, but I mean, it's just a 2-drop low-end blocker that's really, really utilizable. Next out, we have 4 Black Maria. Let's talk about Black Maria because I have a lot to say about this card because it's actually really good. Black Maria is a 4-drop blocker. She has 5,000 power initially, but her ability is that on block, you can Dawn -1 to give her a +1K. That +1K makes her 6K, which is just a little bit bigger than your leader, which helps you conserve cards in hand in the mid-game, late game, and it helps you have a card that can actually push on aggressive on your turn. She just has so many purposes. She's more than just a blocker. Just like your 2-drop blockers that you see a lot of players play, she has 1,000 counter. She just costs a little bit more. One thing that I've noticed with this deck is that just cost doesn't really come up too much because at the end of the day, you don't want to be flooding out your hand with a bunch of cards that do have counter in them and playing multiple of them in a turn because that just makes your hand counter weaker. You want to be playing a lot of your turns. You just want to be playing a big card that has a big statement effect and then lasting effect on the field. And that's actually what Black Maria can really do. If you play Black Maria kind of earlier in the game, but lower when you're lower on Dawn because you don't have too much to play, yes, you sacrifice 1K in counter power in your hand, but what you gained in defense is actually really usable. Sometimes in the early game, she's not as usable, but usually once you get up to like 7 or 8, if you have an Onigashima Island and you use her Dawn minus effect, even if you're not going to 10 Dawn the next turn, if your opponent swings 7 at your leader, you block with her Dawn -1, and all you have to do is burn a 2K in hand. In the general space of using resources, you're in a really good spot by doing things like that. And that comes up in a few different ways. And like I touched on earlier, she comes back on the turns that she does survive. She comes back to be a card that can be an offensive pressure onto your opponent. So that's really good. Next up, we have 4 Queen. There's not too much to say about this. This is probably the best card in the deck next to Onigashima. You can play you can play hands that you don't have Onigashima if you see Queen, because you see enough variety of cards that you can get rid of the cards that have no use in your hand and just get the cards that are really good bombs, really good cards that are going to put you in a good place to survive and finish out the game. Queen has a lot of utility, just like the Black Maria stuff I was saying when she blocks on 6K because you Dawn -1. Queen can just do that naturally, which is huge. blocking 6k, blocking those 7ks in the mid game, discarding a 2k so you can conserve cards in hand and just go the distance with your opponent is really, really important. And I just think it can't be understated how fantastic this card is. Yeah, very usable. I just play one of the vanilla Fukujuru. Yeah, this one, the vanilla. 8,000 power is fantastic. It's a really easy drop. It's nice to drop when your opponent hasn't fielded anything, like in the green matchup, when they don't field the Raizo, the Bonnies, the easy low-end blockers, because they know that you're going to drop a king on curve. And those situations, you just tap 6, play this guy out, and now they have something that they really have to deal with, especially going into late game. And it's not easy for them at all to attack into in the early game. Very easy to protect, very easy to use, very easy to field, and it's just kind of a simple card that does a lot. Next out, let's talk about the king package altogether, because I'm playing one of the 6-drop king and 2 of the 7-drop king. I think the biggest thing that influenced this in the deck, and actually something that I want to talk about with the Black Maria slot, is that both of these are kind of the child of this deck being version 1 of kind of a testing. I wanted to test out, because I was playing so many red-green laws and green decks in general, I wanted to test out the 7-drop king at 2 of, and just one of the 6-drop king, because I wasn't playing very much blue in the meta. Now that I play this deck so much more, I just didn't have the time to swap the cards out in between the tournaments that I won, and I just kind of kept the deck together and just kind of pulled it out last second for the tournament for the day. But the reason that these ratios are so weird, and I would change them, is just because that they're just test slots. So with king being only able to pop a 4 or less, it felt like it wasn't as useful, but I really would like to get a second king in here. And with the 2 7-drop kings, with it popping just 3 costs and less, it just doesn't feel like it pops something big enough to be like really, really needed. It's really useful in the red-green matchup when you can get rid of 2 blockers and then push a really aggressive turn and things like that. But I was just so just focus on trying to have that be like kind of the slot that my king represented in the deck, that I cleared like wide blocker boards and stuff like that, that I didn't really think about the fact that I could really just play more Who's Who and things like that in the deck and kind of get the same effect and kind of be on tempo with my opponent. And I think something like that would be a really good route to go. It is a good card. I just kind of think that I don't need to play it at 2 of. Now, another card that I do have at 2 of that would not change is 8-drop Kaido. 8-drop Kaido is fantastic. I love this card so much. It's it turns on so many plays that we can talk about in the deck. The biggest thing that it does is that even when you don't see Onigashima, this is another one of the cards that you look for, because if you don't have Onigashima ramp, you do want Kaido ramp. A lot of people kind of stop caring about this card when they realize that it costs 8, and that means that you're going to be on 10 on the next turn. But I just challenge people to kind of like think about what about the turn after that, and what about how much Dawn you're on at the end of that turn. So if you tap 8 for this, go up to 9, and then you go to your next turn and you're on 10, that gives you the ability to, you know, tap 9 for Kaido, the 9-drop Kaido. You can do leader effect to Dawn -7 if you really need to burn damage. And at the end of the day, you might be ending your turn on 5 or 3 Dawn. And in those situations, when you tap your Onigashima to go up +1, and then you have this Kaido to +1, now at the end of the day, you're climbing a lot faster back up to 10. And it's just really, really useful. This card is a game winner against the Kaido matchup, because you can drop this card as a feint to force your opponent to 10-drop Kaido you before you 10-drop Kaido them. And if they keep playing with you and they leave this Kaido on the board like for free, and you just keep swinging with it, pushing damage because it has 9k base, you can even drop a 9-drop Kaido on top of it. 9-drop Kaido, you'll go down to 5, tap to ramp up to 6. This Kaido will drop and put you up to 7. You force them into 10-dropping that turn, or else they just you threaten to 10-drop them again after that, and now you have 2 big boss monsters fielded. And if it's a read that you think that you can do, it's really, really good, because at the end of the day, even if you can't 10-drop them right away, if you drop this Kaido and you're on high life, let's say you're on 4 life and they're on, and you can push them down to 3, 2, or 1, that's a really bad spot, because if they drop the 10-drop Kaido, right, you go 1 turn without a 10-drop Kaido, but the next turn your 10-drop Kaido is turned on. They can't develop a board of blockers and things like that on their next turn, because you can 10-drop Kaido them, and then you just put them in a really bad position. So this card is fantastic and can do so much for you just by turning on that extra ramp. Oh, the other thing, actually, the biggest thing that this card can do, though, is that when you're dropping your Kaidos, if you play this first on curve at 8, and then you drop your 9-drop Kaido, If you're on 10, you play 9-drop Kaido, you go down to 5, you tap Onigashima to go up to 8. End of your turn, you're going to ramp with this and go up to 7. That means that you're going to start your next turn with 9 non, and that means that you can field a second Kaido. And that's the reason that we have this Kaido at 4 of. We want to be dropping these Kaidos back to back, essentially in the late game, and just field a board that your opponent can't deal with. Everything that they put on the board, because a lot of people aren't used to seeing Kaidos back to back. In the green matchup, you might drop the 9-drop Kaido if you have the 8-drop on board and you crack something like a Yamato or a 6-drop Law. A lot of times what they'll do is just eat the loss in the card, but they'll field another Yamato. They'll field another 6-drop Law to try to get back into the state that they were in before. And in this version of the deck, you can just drop another Kaido and just keep them down while you're still posing pressure. I really like the 8 to 9-drop Kaido combo, and I really like 9-drop Kaido. This is another card that is in is just in that 4 of, because it was testing when I originally built the deck, and just the original version, just this version of the deck has just been performing so well. I haven't swapped the cards yet, but this card you can play at 3 of. Sometimes when you do see a Kaido in your life, you start your hand out with a Kaido in your early hand because you saw Onigashima, and then you draw one late game and you're sitting on 3 of them. That can feel a little bit like why. I have dropped 3 of these back to back, and I'll actually tell you the combo on how to do that now. So if you do the Kaido thing where you start off an 8 and you ramp and you go to 10, the first Kaido that you drop when you're on 10, right? You Onigashima put them down to 5, or put yourself up to 6, I'm sorry. And then you end your turn, you go to 7, right? But when you drop this Kaido, if you're on 10 Dawn, that leaves 1 active Dawn, and then this ramps you another active Dawn, so that leaves you with 2 Dawn standing. You can tap 2 and play Thunder Bagua to put yourself back up to 10 on your next turn. That means that when you drop the 9-drop Kaido, you're going down to 5, ramping to 6, ramping to 7, and on your next turn that you're starting, you're going to be on 9 again, all because you saw Thunder Bagua on your off turn on the first time that you went from 10 to 5. There's other ways to do it, like if they hit your life and you let them hit your life and you trigger a Thunder Bagua on life, or just somehow to ramp on your opponent's side of the board. That means that you can drop 3 Kaido if you have these in hand. I've only done it 2 times against opponents, and it was just like, you know, you just had the combo in hand, but it's possible, so I wanted to tell you guys kind of how that interaction worked. The biggest thing you want to look for if you think that you have that is way too many 9-drop Kaidos in hand and Thunder Bagua on hand. If you have those with the 8-drop, then you just have the combo. So this is really all you gotta think about ahead of time. Talking about the 10-drop Kaido, I actually had a conversation with my friend where we talked about how much we don't like this card, but at the end of the day, you need to play it at 2. A lot of times it doesn't really feel like it saves you if you see it too late, but if you see it too early, oh my god, this card feels like it just runs your opponent over. If you see it super early if it's the first Kaido that you see in your hand and you see an Onigashima, you can just play the game out so passively and not field anything, not really care about what's on the board, put a blocker on the board just to save off some board presence on your opponent. Maybe it's a queen, so you can filter out that second dead Onigashima. Sacrifice the queen on the first swing. If they swing a 5k leader, you just block with the queen because you know that they're going to invest resources into swinging into the queen that you don't have to defend your life with, and then you just drop the queen, leave it alone, whatever. And then next turn, you drop the 10-drop Kaido. I think that those are the situations that this card is best in. Obviously, it's an out to 8-drop kid. You really need it in those matchups and things like that. But as far as using it as just a regular boss monster, you can use it in the purple Kaido matchup as another Kaido out. I wouldn't drop it first in that matchup. But in everything else, there's just so many different ways that you can utilize it. Pump fake your opponent into just using way too many resources into your board and stuff like that. Even if you go down on low life, if you're on a high hand and you drop this card, as long as you're not on 1 life, you're going to be in a pretty good position to kind of finish out the game. So 10-drop Kaido at 2 of is a must, I would say, and I wouldn't change it. Getting into kind of the most controversial portion of the deck, we're going to talk about the 2K counters because I play all of them. Make sure you guys can see everything. Yeah, that looks good. Talking about the 4, 8, 12, 15 2K counters I play and why I play 15. Defensive cards in hand. A lot of cards in the purple matchup, or in the purple pool, don't do enough for the deck. And all it boils down to is that you have your Onigashima, your ramping cards, and then you have your defensive package. The biggest thing that supports the defensive package is when you don't have to burn blockers and things like that, because you can just counter out of attacks. And the 2K counters just do a lot. When you can accumulate a lot of 2K counters, if your opponent swings into your life and your last 2 life is 2 2K counters, and you had 1 in hand, that means that you're defending against things like raw Kaido swings. You're defending against things like 9-drop Eustass swings, only using counters in hand, and it's just really usable. The biggest place that this is just something to kind of be like, well, you don't need 15 of them. They stack, so if you're burning them in the early game, when you have 15, you know that you can burn them in the early game, but there's just so many cards that people say that they would play in these slots that I just don't think I would play. The biggest thing being is Jack, the 3-drop that you discard a card to ramp a card. The reason I just don't play Jack in this build at all, something we can talk about right now, is that I just don't feel like Jack puts you in a winning position. I feel like if Jack is the card that you're using to replace your Onigashima because you don't have Oniga, and you're using it to ramp, you're giving up too much resource in the early and mid game to go into the late game and properly protect yourself when you're putting it all on the board. It's nice when your opponent doesn't have enough to counter out of, you know, a 10k swing and things like that. But at the end of the day, sometimes your opponent will be able to defend against those attacks and push you into a position where you need to live for one more turn so you can offensively push for one more turn. And things like Jack just don't get you there because they burn your resources in the early game and then you can't conserve them to go into the late game. Playing this many 2k counters, it just, at the end of the day, this deck is compiled of cards that I want to either field or I can use and hold in my hand because I can tap 7 and play a king. I can tap 6 and play a king or a vanilla. I can tap 5, play a queen, and then tap 4 right after that and play a blocker and then hold all of this in my hand as opposed to like tapping 3, playing a Jack. Tapping 2, playing like an ulti, and cards like that. So that's the reason that you don't see those cards in this list, but you see an abundant amount of 2Ks. The 2Ks all do the same thing pretty much, except for the X-Drake. But the fact of the matter is that it's your defense. You're pitching these cards a lot just to stay alive, just to put a lot of pressure onto your opponent. And that's what this deck does really, really well. Kind of talking about, let's break this up a little bit because that's a lot of cards. We'll push this off to the side. Talking about the last cards in the deck, it's going to be our defensive event options. So we'll start off with Blast Breath. Blast Breath is an amazing card because it combos so perfectly with Kaido. With Blast Breath and Kaido, it feels like you can just dump one. If you have multiple Blast Breath and Kaido, you feel so safe because you're dumping Blast Breaths on the 7Ks and things like that to prevent any damage from coming through. And then when your opponent is committing a lot of resource to swinging at you with 9, 11, and things like that, now you're defending against it so much more easy because you're tapping 1 for Blast Breath and then you're just dumping 2 cards, 2Ks, and things like that. When you're sitting on these cards, even with only a few cards in hand, usually the few cards in my hand are going to be the biggest counters that I can possibly have, which are going to be the 2s and the 4s. So I'm not sitting in too bad of a position. Blast Breath is really easy to explain why it's such a fantastic card. But talking about Thunder Bagua, this card is at 3 of, and I think 3 is the perfect number. You see it a good amount, and it's really easy to utilize. It's usable in that combo like we were talking about earlier, where you tap 9 for your 9-drop Kaido, but you leave that last Dawn standing, so you're only swinging 5 with your leader, and everything else on board is swinging at base strength, so that you can promo Kaido, ramp 1, and have 2 active so that you can tap the 2, ramp another card, and now you're playing another turn where you're on 10. There's not a lot to say about Thunder Bagua that's not just inherently stated. It's a really good defensive card, and that's kind of what it does. Talking about the deck and like something I mentioned earlier, how we were in a spot where we were kind of this deck was built kind of to be a once-over and to be edited. Some of the edits that I think that I will make is going to be swapping out the kings like we were talking about earlier, but swapping over one of the Black Marias. She is a fantastic card, and this has gone from an experimental slot to now testing to see if there's any card that's better than Black Maria in its one-of slot or in its slot. With the idea of testing the one Black Maria, it would be swapping out to play another 2-drop blocker. Nothing different, nothing to make it more offensive. The reason that the 2-drop blocker would be kind of ideal is just because sometimes it is kind of costly to tap 4 to play the Black Maria. If you're on 7 non and you can fit a 5 and a 2 and not a 5 and a 4, it's just nice to have that variety. And with the Black Marias, you really only stick 2 of them per game. So if I'm sticking 2 of them per game, ideally, I think playing 3 of them with as much draw, ramp, and as much damage as I take, I think playing 3 of them would be a consistent number, but that's what we're testing, is testing to see if that would be consistent and seeing if that would be worth it. Another card that I'm kind of thinking about swapping a slot off is my king slots and getting Who's Who in here. With where we're at right now, we play so many 2K counters that I really like all the cards in my hand to do things. Who's Who is just a really good card because you can use it to kind of tempo down your opponent against green and red, but it kind of does nothing against purple and blue, and that's where I'm really torn in whether it's worth it because both of these cards are just usable in every single matchup. These kings are probably going to go down to a 1-of, just because you want to hold this king and you just want to drop it on the one turn where it's perfect. Well, that's really it. You want to see it when you have a Kaido on board and stuff like that, and you tap 7 to clear 2 blockers. Outside of that, it's not something you really sit on because you tap 7 and you end on 5 Dawn, which just puts you a little bit too far behind. This is kind of a super mess, so I apologize if anybody's still trying to get a screenshot for a deck profile or anything like that. But that's kind of where I'm at with the deck. There's not a lot I would change. Playing the deck in the past couple tournaments and having it perform so well, just kind of out of the box and how it is, I do think this deck does perform like super, super well. Just kind of testing out some of those other ideas, like if switching up the kings and things like that. Maybe I'm just going to play 3 of the 6-drop king, none of the 7-drop king, and try to fit a Who's Who. Maybe I'll do 2 6-drop kings, drop the vanilla, play a 3rd one. Who knows? But that's the version that I'm on right now with Kaido. It's been playing really well for me, and there's just not a lot that I would change all in all. But I think that's really all I can say about this deck. I think that just kind of breaks it down really, really well. That's kind of just for a final screenshot. Get these someplace that you can kind of see that doesn't cover too much. But yeah, no, this is going to be made with Opus Gaming. I'm out. Take care, you guys.